Some secrets are not merely buried with the dead. They are woven into the very fabric of the earth, whispered on forgotten winds, etched into the despair of generations. In the heart of Mississippi, a silence fell in 1851. Not the silence of a grave, but the suffocating hush of a truth violently suppressed. A truth so terrifying, the very ground it stained was cursed to forget. This is the story of Caleb, an albino slave, and the legend of how he bled his master white. But this is no simple ghost story. This is a descent into the festering wound of America's past, a dark liturgy of fear performed in the shadow of unspoken atrocities. What you are about to hear was never meant to be discovered. Our journey begins not with a ghost, but with a disappearance. The kind that leaves no trace, no struggle, only an unbearable void. A void that swallowed the name and existence of Caleb, a young man born under a rare, unsettling star, an albino in a world that saw even less humanity in him than in his brethren. His unique appearance, a spectral anomaly against the sun-baked fields, marked him for an isolation even deeper than his chains. This wasn't just a boy. He was an omen, a whispered curse, a deviation from the natural order, deemed both a blessing and a blight by those who owned him. His very presence on the sprawling, fertile lands of the Devereaux Plantation was an unsettling anomaly, a white shadow amidst a sea of dark despair. The Devereaux family, deeply pious and outwardly respectable, understood the power of appearance. And Caleb, their ghostly asset, was a volatile secret. The Devereaux Plantation, a sprawling empire built on cotton and cruelty, was a bastion of southern gentility. From the outside, it was a picture of prosperity. Grand columns, manicured lawns, and the ringing of Sunday church bells. But beneath the veneer of civility, a rot festered. Elias Devereaux, the patriarch, was a man of iron will and brittle faith, his eyes perpetually narrowed, always searching for the next flaw, the next disobedience. He saw Caleb not as a human being, but as a peculiar commodity, a curiosity that could either bring him immense fortune or irreparable shame. The other enslaved people, too, regarded Caleb with a mixture of awe and fear. His pale skin, his startling, unblinking eyes, set him apart, making him an outsider even among outcasts. They whispered of his origins, of spirits and ancient curses, weaving a tapestry of folklore around his fragile existence. He was a living myth, a premonition of something terrible. Caleb's childhood was one of silent observation, a life lived on the fringes. He was kept largely hidden, relegated to tasks in the darkest corners of the estate, away from prying eyes and the judgment of Devereaux's esteemed guests. But even in isolation, his albino skin, highly sensitive to the sun, became a cruel instrument of torture. The relentless Mississippi sun, a golden enemy, peeled and blistered his skin, turning his daily toil into an agonizing endurance test. His suffering, however, was not only physical. The psychological torment of being an anomaly, of being perceived as less than human, of carrying the weight of ancient superstitions, carved deep wounds into his psyche. He learned to exist in the shadows, to move with a spectral grace, his quietness mistaken for docility, his unblinking gaze for emptiness. They never saw the fire beneath the ice. The overseers, brutal men hardened by the sun and the systemic dehumanization of their charges, found a perverse fascination in Caleb. His unusual appearance made him a target for their cruelest whims. Beatings, often inexplicable and unprovoked, were a daily ritual. Elias Devereaux himself would sometimes watch, a detached curiosity in his eyes, testing the limits of Caleb's endurance, observing him as one might an animal. It was a calculated cruelty, designed not just to inflict pain, but to break the spirit, to ensure absolute submission. But with Caleb, something was different. Each lash, each burn, each moment of degradation did not break him. Instead, it seemed to solidify something within him, a core of cold, quiet resistance. A dangerous seed of defiance began to germinate in the desolate landscape of his soul. Reverend Josiah Thorne, the circuit preacher who visited the Devereaux Plantation monthly, spoke of divine order and righteous suffering. His sermons, booming with fire and brimstone, often pointed to deviations from the norm as signs of God's displeasure. Caleb, the albino, was a frequent, unspoken example in his parables. The church, meant to be a sanctuary, became another instrument of control, echoing the planter's rhetoric, reinforcing the idea of a natural hierarchy, justifying the inexplicable. Thorne would often linger after sermons, his eyes fixated on Caleb, a strange mix of fear and zealous conviction. He spoke of purifying the impure, of cleansing the land of its sins. To Caleb, the preacher's words were just more shackles, spiritual chains forged to bind his spirit as surely as iron bound his wrists. The other enslaved people, caught between their own terror and the brutal reality of their existence, found solace in hushed conversations and ancient traditions. They spoke of conjure, of spirits that walked the earth, of justice exacted by forces beyond mortal comprehension. Caleb, with his otherworldly pallor and unsettling quietude, became a vessel for these tales, a living embodiment of the supernatural in their desperate lives. They believed he carried an ancient power, a latent force that set him apart. They told him stories of how the spirits of the wronged could rise, not as ghosts, but as avenging forces, capable of tearing down the very foundations of their oppressor's world. These stories, whispered in the dim light of cabins, were the only solace, the only promise of retribution in a life devoid of hope. Elias Devereux, despite his outward piety, was consumed by a hidden, gnawing fear. He was a man obsessed with control, yet he sensed an untamable wildness in Caleb, a spirit that refused to be fully broken. The planter's journals, later discovered and meticulously censored, hint at disturbing experiments conducted on Caleb, attempts to understand, to quantify, to ultimately subdue what he perceived as a threat to his absolute authority. These entries are vague, chilling in their omissions, suggesting practices far beyond the brutality of the cotton field. They speak of isolating Caleb, of psychological tortures designed to break his mind, to turn him into a compliant, empty vessel. Devereux believed that by controlling Caleb's spirit, he could quell the growing unrest among the other enslaved people, who had begun to look at the albino with a new, dangerous reverence. The corruption extended beyond the Devereux fields. The local sheriff, a stoic, brutish man named Silas Croft, was a loyal enforcer of the planter's will. Disappearances in the county were not uncommon, especially among the enslaved population. Croft would simply turn a blind eye, his silence bought with Devereux's influence and coin. When Caleb's disappearance was finally noted not by concern, but by the absence of a working body, Croft merely filed a perfunctory report, attributing it to a runaway or a swamp accident. The official record, carefully manicured, swallowed the truth whole. The system, designed to protect the powerful, efficiently erased the existence of those it deemed disposable. Caleb became a non-person, a forgotten statistic in the brutal calculus of the South. But the absence of a body did not mean an absence of whispers. The other field hands, wary of official retribution, continued to tell their stories in secret. They spoke of a final, brutal confrontation between Elias Devereux and Caleb. They spoke of an argument in the cotton fields, intensified by the oppressive heat and the planter's unyielding rage. Whispers carried fragmented images. Elias, his face contorted with fury, wielding a bullwhip. Caleb, his pale skin stark against the dark earth, his eyes, usually downcast, now blazing with an unnerving intensity. The official story of a runaway was a flimsy veil, barely concealing the terror that rippled through the plantation after that day. Something far more profound, far more horrifying had transpired. On the morning after Caleb's disappearance, something peculiar happened. The cotton field where he had last been seen, a place of immense toil and suffering, began to change. The pristine white bowls, usually a symbol of prosperity, took on a subtle, unsettling hue. A faint, almost imperceptible crimson began to stain the fibers, deepening with each passing day. The field hands whispered of it, their eyes wide with dread. They said it was Caleb's blood, saturating the very earth, staining the white gold that had consumed his life. Elias Devereux, initially dismissing it as a blight, grew increasingly agitated. This was not merely a crop failure. It was a visible manifestation, a terrifying reminder of something he desperately wanted to bury. Elias Devereux, a man who prided himself on his control and his stoicism, began to unravel. He spent hours staring at the darkening cotton, his sleep plagued by nightmares. His skin, once ruddy and robust from years in the sun, began to lose its color, becoming increasingly ashen, almost translucent. His wife, perplexed and concerned, attributed it to stress, to the mounting pressures of his estate. But Elias knew better. He saw the crimson in the cotton, felt the cold dread seeping into his bones. He heard a whisper on the wind, a name he had tried to erase, repeating over and over. Caleb, the planter, a man who had bled others dry for his own gain, was now himself being drained, slowly, inexorably, by an unseen force. The Devereux family doctor, Dr. Alastair Finch, was called in. He examined Elias, baffled by his rapid physical decline. There was no fever, no discernible illness, yet his patient was wasting away, his vitality ebbing with each passing day. Finch, a man of science, searched for a rational explanation, but found none. He noted Elias's increasing paranoia, his frantic attempts to burn portions of his own cotton crop, claiming it was tainted. The doctor, a man accustomed to diagnosing the ailments of the body, was utterly unprepared for the sickness of the soul, for the creeping horror that had taken root in Elias Devereux. He dismissed it as delirium, but a chilling suspicion began to form in the back of his mind, a fleeting thought of something unnatural. The local townsfolk, accustomed to the Devereux family's dominance, began to notice the strange occurrences on the plantation. The crimson cotton was a spectacle, an unsettling curiosity that drew whispered speculation. Children spoke of seeing a pale, indistinct figure moving through the fields at dusk, its eyes glowing faintly. The old women, wise in the ways of folklore, spoke of restless spirits, of unavenged wrongs. The Devereux family, once a beacon of respectability, found themselves shrouded in an aura of unsettling mystery. The fear, once confined to the enslaved quarters, began to leak into the white community, a slow, insidious poison that eroded their comfortable illusions. This wasn't just a plantation. It was becoming a tomb. Elias's wife, Eleanor Devereux, a woman of deep religious conviction, turned to prayer. She believed her husband was being tested, assailed by demonic forces. She brought in Reverend Thorne, who, equally bewildered by Elias's decline, resorted to fervent exorcisms and blessings, drenching the plantation in holy water and impassioned pleas. But the rituals were useless. The pallor on Elias's skin deepened. His eyes sunk further into their sockets, and the crimson stain on the cotton fields spread like a silent contagion. The spiritual efforts, far from offering solace, only highlighted the terrifying impotence of their faith against the unseen force that was slowly, methodically, consuming Elias. The evil they sought to banish was not external. It was deeply embedded in the very foundations of their prosperity. The final, horrifying act unfolded not in the fields, but within the grand manor itself. Elias Devereux, now a skeletal shadow of his former self, retreated to his study, locking himself away. The sounds that emanated from within were unspeakable. Guttural cries, desperate pleas, and then, a chilling, profound silence. When the doors were finally breached, Eleanor and Reverend Thorne found him. Elias Devereux lay upon his desk, his eyes wide and vacant, his body utterly drained of blood. His skin, once merely pale, was now a shocking, pristine white, as if every drop of color, every essence of life, had been siphoned from him. His lips were slightly parted, as if to utter a final, silent scream. There was no blood visible on Elias, no wound, no struggle. Only the horrifying, unnatural whiteness of his corpse. Panic erupted. The official story, swiftly constructed by Sheriff Croft and Reverend Thorne, was that Elias had succumbed to a mysterious illness, a rare fever. They spoke of God's will, of inexplicable tragedies. But the whispers intensified. The field hands knew. They spoke of Caleb's spirit, of a vengeance so profound, it had literally drained the life force from his oppressor. They said Caleb, the albino, had returned to reclaim his stolen essence, to turn the tables, to bleed his master white. The fear on the plantation, previously a tool of oppression, now became a haunting specter, a shared dread that transcended their chains. The cotton fields, too, responded to Elias's death. The crimson stain deepened, becoming a vibrant, undeniable red. The bolls, when picked, felt unnaturally heavy, almost soaked. This phenomenon, never explained, forced the Devereux family to abandon the fields, to let them go fallow, cursed. No one dared work that land again. The crimson cotton became a permanent scar on the landscape, a silent monument to a terrifying act of retribution. It was a physical manifestation of a spiritual debt, a vibrant testament to the blood price exacted by a tormented soul. The land itself cried out, bearing witness to the horrors it had silently absorbed. Eleanor Devereux, shattered by the horrific death of her husband and haunted by the unspoken truths, retreated into a fervent, almost insane piety. She tore down her husband's study, burned his journals, scrubbing every surface as if to erase the lingering scent of death and sin. She spoke of evil spirits, of a demon that had claimed her husband, never once mentioning Caleb by name. Her children, raised in a household steeped in fear and denial, inherited not a legacy of wealth, but a profound, unspoken trauma. They grew up knowing something unspeakable had happened, a dark shadow clinging to their family name, a secret they were forbidden to acknowledge, let alone discuss. The silence was the real killer. Years passed. The Devereux plantation eventually fell into ruin, the grand manor crumbling, reclaimed by the encroaching wilderness. The crimson cotton fields remained, a stark, unsettling anomaly on the landscape, a silent warning to those who dared to venture near. Local folklore began to weave a new tale around the abandoned estate. Of Caleb's ghost, a spectral albino figure, forever wandering the fields, ensuring no new crop of white gold could ever again be tainted by the blood of the innocent. They said he was the keeper of the memory, the spectral guardian of an untold story, a silent sentinel demanding perpetual remembrance. Historians, decades later, attempting to piece together the Devereux family history, found inconsistencies, gaps in the records. The abrupt sale of the property, the strange medical reports of Elias Devereux, the sudden shift in local narratives, all pointed to a carefully orchestrated cover-up. They found redacted passages in old county records, hastily rewritten entries, and missing pages from local church ledgers. The conspiracy of silence was vast, a collective effort to bury not just a man, but the horrific truth of his demise and the systemic brutality that precipitated it. The official history of Mississippi was rewritten, cleansed of its most inconvenient, most terrifying truths. The story of Caleb, the albino slave who bled his master white, became a whispered myth, a cautionary tale passed down through generations of the formerly enslaved. It was a story of cosmic justice, of a spiritual reckoning, a reminder that even in the darkest corners of oppression, there are forces that will not be denied. It was a story of defiance, of reclaiming agency in the most terrifying, supernatural way imaginable. It symbolized the power of the repressed, the ultimate unyielding strength of a spirit broken but never truly extinguished. His legend served as a beacon of hope in the darkness, a promise that no atrocity would truly be forgotten. But the psychological scars ran deeper than folklore. The descendants of Elias Devereux, though generations removed, carried the weight of the unspoken. A strange, inexplicable pallor sometimes afflicted members of the family line, a genetic whisper of their ancestors' final, horrifying transformation. They experienced recurring nightmares of crimson fields and unblinking white eyes. The trauma, unaddressed and unacknowledged, seeped into their very DNA, a generational haunting that transcended the physical realm. The sins of the father, truly, were visited upon the children, manifesting as a silent, creeping horror that defied modern explanation. Today, If you visit the site of the old Devereux plantation, a profound stillness hangs in the air. The trees stand sentinel, ancient and silent. And if you look closely, even now, after all these years, some say you can still see it, a faint, almost ghostly crimson tint in the soil, particularly where the cotton fields once bloomed. It's a color that speaks of old blood, of forgotten suffering, and of a spectral vengeance that defied both man and God. It's a testament to Caleb, the silent avenger, whose spirit lingers, a permanent stain on the landscape, a reminder that some truths, once unearthed, can never truly be buried again. Caleb's story is a chilling reminder of the cost of institutional control, of the hidden corruption that festers beneath polite society, and of the ancient traumas that refuse to remain buried. It is a liturgy of fear, performed not in a church, but in the desolate fields of memory, echoing a truth too terrifying to speak aloud. And perhaps, if you listen closely enough on a windswept night, you might just hear the spectral whisper of a name that bled a master white, Caleb.